こんにちは。僕はアンドルーです。2年間前、日系に勤めに東京に住んでいました。まだ毎週日本語は勉強がもちろん今日の特は英語で。Hello, I'm Andrew. I would like to invite you to spend the next 30 minutes of your life listening to me talk about feature policy. I'm a big fan of the web. I used to be a member of the W3C technical architecture group, and I now work for Fastly, which serves a lot of content on the web. I care a lot about the evolution of the web. I just realized I have my glasses. Many things like geolocation, WebVR, upgrades to JavaScript, these things add new features and capabilities to the web platform, and they allow us to do more with the web. Today I want to talk about something that lets us do the opposite. Instead of helping us to make the web bigger, it helps us by making the web smaller. Why would that make sense? So, as it turns out, some things are a bad idea. Sometimes they seem like a good idea at the time, and then later we realize that they are problematic. App cache is a good example of this. It was later replaced by Service Worker, which turns out to be a far better solution for offline websites. In other cases, solutions are perfectly good, and they do a good job, sometimes for a long time, but then they just run out of steam. We realize that they reach the end of their useful life. So domain sharding is a good example of this. They gave us a performance boost, but then we invented HTTP2, and now we don't need domain sharding anymore. Bad ideas become a problem when we can't move past them. So right now, I'm in the middle of buying an apartment in a very old building, and part of that apartment does not appear on any of the plans. So I might need to remove that part. However, I can't because my neighbor upstairs has already built something else on top of that part of the apartment. So if I remove it, then his apartment will collapse. So today the web is almost 30 years old, and we have a lot of this stuff. We've made a lot of mistakes. So how do we move on from these mistakes? And I want to start this talk by looking at that today. So I'd like to invite you to cast your mind back, if you're physically capable, to the year 2000. And try and remember what the web was like back then. To help you, the most popular phone at the time, at least globally, was the Nokia 3310. This is an amazing piece of technology. It had the kind of battery life that meant you would go on holiday for a week and not bother to take the charger. But my question to you is, what was the most popular JavaScript method on the web in 2000? Now, I don't have any data on this. There was no HTTP archive. There was no web page test. And yet, I'm pretty confident that I know which method was the most popular. This one. That's because I remember the web in 2000, and it was like this. But the web doesn't look like this anymore, thank God. We fixed it. We fixed it by restricting the circumstances in which you can invoke window.open. Initially, this was developers building browser extensions, and then later, browser vendors building pop-up blocking into the browser itself. And we can think of these sort of incentives in terms of a kind of triangle of different perspectives. Developers, browser vendors, major web platforms like Facebook and Twitter that act as the starting points for your journey to the rest of the web. And we have standards bodies like W3C, IETF, and WhatWG, and regulators like the EU or national governments. Everyone has their own part to play in pushing and pulling the web in different directions as it evolves, but no one person or organization is in charge. So I like to compare this to more mature ecosystems like global aviation. Somehow, millions of flights happen every year, and yet planes don't routinely crash into one another. A pretty complex network of commercial agreements, bilateral treaties, regulations, and international standards keep our planes safely and efficiently flying without any one person or country being in charge of that system. And I think that's quite relevant to the challenges that we see on the web. So let's step forward to another crisis in the evolution of the web. The year is now 2007. The most popular phone, the first generation Apple iPhone, the first device with a truly usable mobile web browser, although it didn't have any mobile data capability, so to use the web you had to be on Wi-Fi. The web is no longer a crazy mess of pop-up windows, but now we have another problem. Almost every website is using Flash to display ads, and as well as being a vector for security vulnerabilities, it is also consuming a ton of system resources, often more than the browser itself. You can tell this is a screenshot of a very early version of Chrome, by the way, because it's only using 1/4 of a gigabyte of RAM. In this case, Apple reacts to this by simply saying they're not going to support Flash. This is the open letter that Steve Jobs wrote on the Apple website, explaining that decision. So this intervention effectively killed Flash on the web. Perhaps not immediately, but over the next few years, everyone retooled, stopped using Flash, accelerating the development of new solutions like HTML Canvas. Okay, so people look back on these two interventions, the pop-up blocking and dropping support for Flash, and generally see them as positive things for the web platform. They helped us evolve further and faster. Let's move on to the web's next crisis. It's 2015. The phone of the moment, a Samsung Galaxy S7. Not only has this phone got fast mobile data, but multiple independently installable and updatable web browsers, a super fast CPU with an insane number of cores and a silly name. So with all of this power at our disposal, at the fingertips of our users, is the web now a great experience? Not really. Around this time, we were seeing an enormous increase in the average size of a web page. According to this data from SpeedCurve, between 2011 and 2017, the size increased 250%, with the last couple of years of that increase being almost entirely video. So the intervention here came from web platforms that no longer wanted to link to excessively heavy and slow-loading websites. Google came up with AMP, or Accelerated Mobile Pages. This is a limited subset of the web platform with constraints designed to guarantee a fast experience. Facebook and Apple had their own variants too, creating a whole category of kind of alternative web-like publishing formats that publishers started referring to as distributed content. The reason for that name was that typically these highly optimized pages are distributed by the platform, not by the publisher, leading to suggestions that these technologies are creating walled gardens and transferring power from publishers and independent developers to already powerful platform owners. I was one of the people making those suggestions, and I wrote this open letter last year to try and raise awareness within Google of how AMP might be a problem for the web. Around 700 people from around the world signed it, and subsequently, Google did change the governance model for the AMP project. They do still remain in full control of it, though, and as of today, elements of it, especially things like the AMP carousel, I think are still quite problematic. But unlike with pop-up windows or with Flash, not enough time has really passed yet for us to judge, or for history to judge, whether this intervention has ultimately been good for the web. So here we are in 2019. Samsung is now making phones with 8 CPU cores and screens that fold in half. And the web is great now. Or is it? Well, A popular news site wrote this article at the beginning of last year, talking about how Mozilla's plans for 2018 would include tackling practices like bad ads, autoplaying videos, and sites that ask for notification permissions on page load. But ironically, they displayed this article on a page that had, oops. My effects are not working. They displayed this on a page that has bad ads, autoplaying video, and ask for notification permissions on page load. So we still need the web to be better. So let's consider what we've learned here about what makes a good intervention. We need something that allows good practices to be declared, recognized, enforced, and rewarded, protects the openness and decentralization of the web, and which doesn't break anything. Because the site that you built on GeoCities in 1999 still needs to work. That's a basic principle of the evolution of the web. It also needs to be a collaborative process, ideally not owned or controlled by any single entity. So, feature policy is potentially that intervention, the next generation of new controls that will help us move the web forward. Let's look at what it is and how it works. Feature policy is an HTTP header, and it's also the allow attribute of the HTML iframe element. It's developer controlled, so you can set your own feature policy for your own site, which expresses a set of standards that your page will conform to. If it doesn't conform to those standards, you're inviting the browser to take action to enforce those controls. The nature of the framework for feature policy and the definitions of the policies themselves are all open standards that you can get involved in. Here's an example of an HTTP request, which we should all recognize because it's pretty old, goes back to like 1997 or so. It has a few request headers describing the nature of the requester and a few response headers that describe the nature of the response. Pretty simple. These days, though, we add a lot of other headers, particularly on the response. So an HTTP exchange today looks more like this. Things like content security policy, strict transport security, these are new uses of HTTP that improve security and performance. Feature policy is just another of this newer generation of HTTP headers. Let's break down what this header value means. If you've used content security policy in the past, then this syntax should be familiar to you. There are tokens representing specific behaviors, and then a list of origins, or the special keywords none, self, or star. In this case, in this example, we're saying that the current document and all subframes cannot use document.write. And likewise, we're saying that the current document and all subframes cannot autoplay video on page load. The document itself is allowed to emit sound, but no third-party iframes within the page will be allowed to do that. In contrast, the unsized media behavior is only allowed on badthirdparty.example.com, but not on any other embedded iframe and not in the document itself. We'll actually look at the unsized media behavior in more detail in a minute. So let's have a look at a demo. How am I going to do this with? We'll see how this goes. Okay, can you see that? Yeah. Okay, so I built this website, featurepolicy.info, and you're welcome to load this up on your own device right now, if you like. It's on GitHub Pages. You'll need the latest version of Chrome Canary with the experimental web platform features flag enabled for all of these policies to work. But you may find that a lot of them will just work on your normal browser as well. So first, let's look at a permissions feature. The camera policy. Can everyone see this? Let me just make it bigger. Okay, so the camera policy controls access to the camera API. Normally, when a web page tries to use the camera, the browser will prompt the user for consent. Then it will attach a permanent consent marker to that origin. So if I come back to the same page later and I try and use the camera, then I won't be prompted and everything will just work. Feature policy adds an extra layer of consent to this process, a sort of self-imposed governance to the use of that API. So if I write a feature policy that sets camera to none, let me just do that. And there it is. And apply it. Okay. Then even though the origin already has my consent to use the camera, it won't work, and it will trigger a permissions-related error. And incidentally, if the browser didn't already have my consent to use the camera, and I try to use the camera, then there will be no prompt. It will just deny permission immediately. So these permission-related APIs are mostly now associated with a feature policy. So this same principle can also be applied to things like geolocation, USB, and so on. For me, though, the more interesting use of feature policy is for those policies that describe behaviors that we want to try and eliminate from the web, because they stop us from moving the web forward, as we've been talking about earlier in the talk. So let's look at a few examples of those. I'm going to start with font display late swap, for which I have to have the DevTools open, but I won't explain why. Okay, so as I refresh this demo, you'll notice that this lovely web font that I've chosen is taking quite a while to load. This is a pretty common experience, especially with English language content, because we tend to use more web fonts more often than Japanese content does. So you'll be on a slow connection, maybe on a train, and you'll be loading a web page, and you know that the text is there, and that the text is loaded, but you can't see it because the font hasn't loaded yet. This is often called a flash of invisible text, or a flash of unstyled text. This is really annoying. It would be better if the developer made more of an effort to ensure that the font loads earlier, and that the font's available when the text needs to be rendered. So font display late swap describes this annoying practice of loading a font after the text and then swapping the rendered text or the invisible text for the text in the correct font. So disabling that policy or disallowing that policy means we're not allowed to do that anymore. So if I do that now, you'll see that my text renders with no delay, but in the fallback font. That's because by disallowing this policy, I've opted into not being allowed to load my font after the text loads. So another fun one, which I'll show you, is layout animations. Okay. So for several years now, we've had the ability to do animations on the web efficiently using CSS transitions and CSS animations. And those use GPU-accelerated render layers. However, it's still very common for sites to do animations that cause the browser to recalculate the layout of the page on every single frame. And that's extremely expensive. So what you're seeing now on the screen here is one of these very expensive animations. Because it's a very simple one, and because my laptop's pretty fast, it's still smooth. But this animation is far more expensive than it needs to be. So if we disallow the layout animations policy by writing this feature policy header, then I'm not allowed to do this anymore. So what happens? Well, the browser will only display the start and end points of the animation, and it will not render any of the intermediate frames. Pretty interesting. Now, earlier I mentioned unsized images. It's actually called unsized media, I think. Unsized media. Unsized media. So let's have a look at that one. So most of us, when we build websites today, we put explicit dimensions on our image tag, width and height. Either using a width and height attribute or using CSS. So the browser knows how to lay out the image elements before it has to load the image data. But ever since the early days of the web, browsers have always been able to derive the size of an image by looking at the image itself. So if it's a really, it's a really bad idea to do this because the page can judder and jump around as the images are loading. So it's a much better idea to declare the size of the image using an explicit width and height attribute so that the browser knows how much space to reserve for that image before it loads the image data. Disallowing the unsized media policy prevents the browser from sniffing the image data to do this. So here we have an image that should be 150 wide by 300 tall. And the browser was, at least, rendering it correctly by auto-detecting the dimensions from the image itself. So if we disallow that ability, then the browser has no idea how big this image should be because there's no clues in the HTML and there's no CSS. So according to the feature policy spec, it will make it 300 wide by 150 high. That size is actually hard-coded into the feature policy spec, believe it or not. So in this case, the image is going to look very stretched. So I think we get the idea. Let's go back to the slides. There we go. So looking at these bad practice policies, what some people are calling hopeful deprecations, because they're hoping to deprecate these behaviors. I wondered, what would the web be like if I disallowed all of them? You can do this quite easily by creating a header using a web debugging proxy like Charles. Where Charles is nothing to do with me, but I happen to think it's a really great tool. So I used it to inject this header into all of the HTML responses that I was receiving in Chrome, and I browsed the web to see how broken it is. So the bottom line is it's very broken. So to make this fair, let's start with the Fastly website. It's not good, to be honest. So like a lot of websites, Fastly loads a few of our script tags synchronously. So that means without any async or defer attributes. Disallowing the sync script policy prevents that behavior. So those scripts, it's not that it forces them to load asynchronously, it just doesn't load them at all. However, several of the scripts on the Fastly site do load asynchronously. And when they load, they expect the scripts that were supposed to have loaded synchronously to be there, and they're not. So this then causes a whole bunch of JavaScript errors. The reason you're not seeing our brand font is because of font display late swap, which we covered earlier on. And you'll also notice here that the logo, the Fastly logo, is not displaying in the top left-hand corner. And this is quite interesting, actually. Like a lot of responsive sites, fluidly responsive sites, the logo on the Fastly site can actually render at a lot of different sizes depending upon the width of the viewport. But we only have one image file. So the size of the image is often larger than the size of the frame that we render it in. Feature policy says that's not good enough. The image size does not match the frame. Therefore, the image is oversized, and so it does not display. So that's our website. We also have some really lovely customers who agreed to let me trash their websites by loading them with my super strict feature policy. So let's start with Le Monde. This is one of the most respected newspapers in the world. The story here is actually remarkably similar to the Fastly website. We have some synchronous scripts, images that aren't sized or optimized enough. But Le Monde also has animations that trigger layout recalculation on every frame, which I demonstrated earlier. So those are being blocked by the layout animations policy. And you can see those being called out individually on the left for each property, so width, height, left, and top. I picked two publishers here to show you because publishers these days are very advanced and have highly experienced development teams of very skilled engineers. They go to conferences like this one. I've completely skipped a slide, sorry. animations rule I demoed earlier on. Okay, so closer to home, let's look at Nikkei. So here the problem is one of unoptimized images. You can see particularly these thumbnails are rather large in data terms compared to the frame size. Feature policy doesn't really like this. Nikkei also has a couple of synchronous scripts similar to Le Monde, so buttons and menus are not working. There we go, okay. So I picked publishers to show you because these are really advanced teams of engineers. They go to conferences like this one. Several Nikkei engineers I know are in the room. I can see them. They know the best practices, but large apps like news websites and e-commerce sites can't change their architecture that quickly. So this is a good demonstration of why feature policy is setting out a challenge for even the very best of today's web. Some sites can change more quickly, though. So what websites can we think of that are small, built by the very best engineering minds, on the cutting edge of web innovation? Rebuild FM, maybe. I did ask Miyagawa-san, so he said yes. This is the Rebuild FM page with my feature policy enforced. So can anyone see anything wrong with it? Put your hand up if you think you can see something wrong with it. Okay, one person thinks there's something wrong with it. Yes. Well done if you spotted it. The icons on the menu here are not displaying correctly. So unfortunately, even Miyagawa-san has a feature policy violation. And it's font display late swap again. But that's the only problem with rebuild.fm. So we can be sure that this site will function correctly. And compared to non-functional buttons and menus, this is an almost perfect result. Almost perfect. So who do we know in the Japanese web development community that is almost certainly on top of feature policy and probably tested their site already? So last year I did lots of talks about HTTP and HTTP headers, and I discovered that at the time I did my research, only about 20 domains in the world were sending the accept ch header for client hints. So pretty up on all of the latest HTTP response headers. This was one of them. Hello, Jack. So you'd better hope this is a good result, I guess. Well, of course it is. No feature policies triggered, so congratulations, the first website I've ever tested that passes all of my feature policies. Anyway, it's fun to dig into the web and see how other people build their sites, but the question I think we should ask is, how do we debug this? Let's assume that Miyagawa wants to comply with all the feature policies, including font display late swap, but the browser that he's using to develop Rebuild FM doesn't support that policy yet. So he might not know that the policy is causing a bad effect for some users because it's not triggering in the browser that he's using. So this is where the reporting API comes in. The reporting API is another web standard. It's not designed specifically for feature policy. It's actually most commonly used for content security policy. But it can be used with feature policy too. So using a few lines of JavaScript, we can set up a reporting observer and get a callback to a custom function when something happens in the browser that we want to observe, that we're interested in. Feature policy violations are one of the things that we can observe. Even more usefully, the reporting API can be invoked via an HTTP header. This is an example. Don't ask me why it's formatted using JSON. That's weird. But configuring the header like this allows the browser to send violation reports to your server as beacons. Now, beacons are very simple HTTP post requests that are independent of your page, independent of your page's JavaScript. So even if nothing is working on your page, even if you don't download the JavaScript at all, the browser can still send you violation reports. I've talked about just a few policies today. This is a list of all the policies that have shipped so far in Chrome, some of them also in Firefox. The The red ones are the ones that are guarding these so-called powerful features, whereas the blue ones are the hopeful deprecations, the policies that guard bad practices that we might want to try and discourage to help the web move forwards. Before I finish, hopefully you'll remember that earlier I showed you a news site that prompts for permission to display notifications on page load. One reason for not naming that site is because everyone does it. And here's Google doing the same thing in Google Calendar. I find this behavior personally very annoying. So this is a good opportunity to propose a new policy. I suggested we create a new policy called Unsolicited Permission Request and define this as any user consent prompt that is triggered without a user action. You can do this too, and if you want help doing it in English, I'm very happy to help you. Please contact me here if you'd like to contribute, and I can also practice my Japanese at the same time. We're also already seeing proposals that build on top of feature policy. Alex Russell from Google has proposed something called Never Slow Mode, which is a kind of mega policy. You activate it by disallowing a behavior called allow slow, and like this. And it will be defined in terms of all of the bad practices, so you don't need to list them individually, plus some strict limits per user interaction. This would include some interesting constraints, like no more than 200 milliseconds of main thread execution per JavaScript task. Do you think that's reasonable? What about the other limits here? Are they reasonable? If you want to influence these limits, then now's the time to get involved and make your voice heard before these numbers get written into a web standard. So in conclusion, feature policy is coming, and it's going to make a difference to the way that we build for the web. You can do two things. First, make sure you're already doing all the things that are today's best practices. Load all your scripts asynchronously. Optimize all your media. Don't autoplay videos, block font rendering, or use layout thrashing animations. But more importantly, take a look at the spec. Take a look at these policies that are being defined and get involved if you can. This is the first time that developer best practice has actually become a part of the web platform and part of the standards that define the web itself. Make sure you don't get taken by surprise and embrace the opportunity to make the next great leap forward on the web. Here is where you can get more information. Thank you very much for your time.
一番最初ですね、大人気コンテンツになってるんですが、質問としていただいているのは、How to decide to default policies って書いてあるんですが、多分直接ここで質問をした人がいるかどうかわからないんですが、デフォルトに今すでに入ってるポリシーはどうやって決めたのかっていう質問ですかね。なんとなくそんな感じだと理解して進めてよいでしょうか。じゃあ、そんな感じでいきます。Yes. No, I'm just making sure the question was we as I understand. So the question was who and how to decide the policies on the spec.
Oh, which policies are in the spec?
Yeah.
Okay. So how do we decide which policies are in the spec? Well, it is really just a matter of whatever people suggest. The editor of the spec is Ian Calland, who works for Google. So to some extent, he is the judge, jury, and executioner when it comes to feature policy. So he will decide, this guy.
Can I stop you? Because I need to translate. どのスペックがスペックにどうやってポリシーが入っていくかに関しては多くの人の意見を聞きながら、進んでいるということなんですけども、基本的にこのイアンさん、Google のイアンさんがある一定の、力を持って、決めていくというような状態になっていますということです。Yes, you can start talk.
This is the issue tracker for feature policy. Many of the issues here are suggestions for new policies.
これが、スペック、フィーチャーポリシーのスペックに対するイシューになっていて、いくつかディフィニション、プロポーズドフューチャーとかもあるように、こんな感じで多くのユーザーからプロポーザルを受け付けているというのが現状ですと。
That's my one.
これが、Is that the last one in the slide?
Yes.
Okay. これがアンドリューが実際に出した、さっきスライドにも出てたUnsolicited Permission Request ですね。はい。
次は
Yes, I forgot about the next question. Wait. Got it. じゃあ次の質問に行きたいと思いますが、Yeah, the question is having
feature policy. How could we deal with unsolicited external third-party scripts such as adverts?
Yes. フィーチャーポリシーがあることによって、そうですね、第三者のスクリプト、例えば広告とかのようなものに対してどのような対処ができるのかという質問になります。
So actually, adverts and advertising is one of the key things that feature policy can help with, because in many cases, the technology used in ads is what's holding back the overall, technology of the website and the performance of the website.
実際にここに質問にあった通りですね、フューチャーポリシーを使うことで、広告に関わるような物事ですね、Javascript を呼び出したりとかっていうこと、サードパーティーにまつわるさまざまな問題を対処することができるというふうに言っています。How?
So, large publishers like Nikkei, the FT, who I used to work for, would set a feature policy saying, for example, no document.write, no access to speaker, no access to camera, and if the ad tries to violate those, then it just won't work.
例えばFT とか日経みたいにですね、大きいパブリッシャーがフューチャーポリシーを使って、広告に対して音が出ないようにするなり、ドキュメントドットライトを禁止するなりですね、動画を流さないとか、そういったことを実際にエンフォースすることができるという可能性もあるというところですね。
And can I just finish say something like I realize that there are a lot of websites and independent developers who will say, well, we can't do that because the advertisers are more powerful than we are. And that's perfectly true, but in other cases, the publisher is very powerful, and so having a technology like this would help to improve the advertising industry generally.
例えば先ほど例に出した FT とか日経みたいにですね、大きな会社じゃなくて、我々みたいな個人のエンジニアにとって、もしくは小さな会社の皆さんにとってっていうところで言うと、広告を出してくれる方々っていうのはすごくパワフルな存在だったりしますので、実際にそういうポリシーを使って止めるっていうことをすると、広告主に怒られるっていうことも考えられると思いますが、FT とか日経みたいにパブリッシャーとして強い会社がですね、そういったことをやることによって、ウェブ全体のフィーチャーポリシーを使ってやることによってウェブ全体のヘルシーさを保つことができるというふうに考えていますということです。So, next question. 次のクエスチョンはYes.
I thought it might be a bit overkill to enforce the policies for all devices. Is it common to enforce some feature policies just for mobile devices? If you want to.
Really?
This is a very new technology, so the best way to use it is maybe something we don't know yet. Maybe it makes sense to apply it only to certain devices. Maybe it makes sense to apply it only in certain situations, but we won't know the answer to this until we start experimenting with it.
はい、もともとの質問はですね、こう全部のデバイスに対してこういう ポリシーを割り当ててしまうのはやりすぎなんじゃないかと、そういうこと、フューチャーポリシーをですねモバイルデバイスにのみ適用するってことはよくあることなのかっていう質問なんですが、アンドリューの答えとしてはもしそうしたければそうしてくださいという感じでした。今まだフィーチャーポリシーって新しい仕様になってますので、その仕様をどういうふうに使うかっていうことに関して多くのプラクティスがあるわけではありません。なので皆さんが思う通りの使い方をするっていう方法で、試してみるっていうところが最初のスタートポイントになるんじゃないかなというお話です。はい。順番が変わった。はい。Next one is I need to
face it this way so that we're not facing away from the audience. This one here?
Yes.
Go for it.
次の質問はですね、上から3つ目にあるやつで、フィーチャーポリシーがパフォーマンス、セキュリティ、プライバシーだとどれが優先されているのかと、こういうポリシーは入らないだろうとか、もしあれば教えてくださいというご質問なんですけども、Does future policy has a priority in performance, security, and privacy? Which is the priority? High priority?
Oh, I see. You mean that what's the most important thing to achieve with feature policy?
Well, I think it's talk about the spec, how the policy is decided to include it in the browser.
I see. Security, performance, or
security, performance, and privacy.
Okay. I think primarily feature policy, at least in the well, there are two kind of big types of feature policy, right? There's the ones that guard the powerful features. For them, it's more about security. If you have a very large feature, something like USB or WebVR, then turning it off just disables a whole lot of code that might have a security vulnerability in it. So if you're not using that feature, then turning it off seems like a very good idea.
大きく分けるとですね、2つ先ほどのスライドに出てたんですけど、フィーチャーポリシーって種類があって、すごくパワフルな機能を持つもの、例えばWebVR とかUSB みたいな API ですね。セキュリティ、こっちに関してはセキュリティが重要項目として捉えられているというふうにお話をしています。例えば VR 全く使わないのにVR のコードが使えるということは、VR の API 側に例えば何がしかのセキュリティブリーチがあった場合に危険な状態に陥ってしまうので、もう使わないとオフにしてしまえばいいっていうような考え方ができるから、そういう順番になっていると。
And the other type is these hopeful deprecations. And in that case, it's probably more about performance because we want to produce, well, it's about performance and it's about user experience. Because we want a web that remains usable and fast and fulfills user expectations well into the future. So for that, we need to get over some of the bad practices of the past, and that's what those policies are designed for. And I would say privacy is less of an issue for feature policy itself.
なるほど。先ほどのスライドにもあった通り、パワフルな方じゃない、ドキュメントドットライト的な、もう二度とやらない方がいいやつですね。ああいうやつの種類のもの、僕がどうやって訳したかすっかり忘れちゃったんですけど、そっちに関してはどちらかというとパフォーマンスを重視した考え方で作られていると。パフォーマンスだけではなくてユーザーエクスペリエンスを重要視するためにそういうポリシーを揃えてるっていう感じで、その2ティアでポリシーは現状、作られているっていうのがあるかなという話です。The same question? So the last, next one is.
We just did that one.
Yes, but what kind of policy that would not go in if?
Oh, I see. What would we not accept as a feature policy? I don't know. I haven't thought about that.
わからないと。どんなポリシーが入るかはまだわかりませんということですね。
Well, let's think about it. What would not make a good feature policy? I guess it would be something that is a matter of opinion. So, and this is the sort of thing that could quite easily be proposed as a feature policy, and that's why I want people to get involved in this, because otherwise you have a very small number of people, and they might well come up with some suggestion for a feature policy just based on what they think is a good idea, but it may actually not be what the rest of us want on the web.
はい、ないとか全く思いつかないってわけでもないんで、せっかくなので考えてみましょうということなんですけども、なぜ先ほどアンドリューがですねトークの中でも今皆さんにできることの2つのうち1つに参加をしてくださいっていうところがですね追加されないだろうっていう話、どういうポリシーが入るべきではないかっていうところで言うとオピニオンめいたもの、単純に意見になってしまうもの、個人の視点だけのものっていうのは入りづらいだろうっていう話なんですけども、現状のポリシーが例えばすごく大きなプレイヤーの意見だけを聞いて取り入れられたものになってしまうかもしれないですし、多くのユーザーが集まった意見こそ聞かれるべきちゃんと耳をそば立てるべきことなので、先ほどのお話にあった通り皆さんが参加することでフェアなポリシーが作られていくんではないかということでした。So the next question is where did I? Oh, right.
You were on that one.
Yes.
This one?
No, I thought that's the.
Oh, we did that
yes,
one.
we did that one.
This one?
How should we implement feature policy? Yeah, that's a good question. どうやって次のクエスチョンなんですけどもだんだん英語と日本語が混ざってきましたが、どうやってフューチャーポリシーを、自分たちの持っているサイトに実装するべきかというところを、聞いてみたいと思います。How?
Okay, so in the talk we saw two ways that you can apply feature policy to your site. One is through an HTTP header, and the other is by adding an allow attribute to iframes. And I didn't show you an example of the second one, but that's actually how my demo site works.
先ほどスライドであった通りですね、HTTP ヘッダーを通じてフィーチャーポリシーを設定することになります。もう一個の方法はナイフレームの中にアローの属性を、入れていくっていうところで、これが実際にアローを入れているやり方になります。Where is the arrow? Yeah, 見えないかな。アローの中に、レイアウトアニメーションが許されていればスターですね、になっていると。アンドリューが答えてるわけじゃないですけど、CSP ですかね、コンテンツセキュリティポリシーの実装をしたことがある方は、なんとなく同じもんだなと思っていただければ良いかなと思ってます。フィーチャーポリシーってヘッダーを、CSP に変えると大体似たような感じで動いてくれるはずです。
So we turn this off, you can see it changes to layout animations none.
はい、今アンドリーベッツ変えていただいたんですけど、アローの中にさっきまではスターが入ってたので使えますっていうか全部 OK ですっていう感じだったんですけど、何に変えると、動かなくなるというか、レイアウトアニメーションが、先ほど説明した通り途中と最後の、フレームしか出なくなるというような状態になります。なのでこうやって、サイトの方に実装していくっていう感じになります。はい。iframe の中だけこれは許すとか許さないとかっていう実装の仕方も可能ですというところですね。はい。Wait, I need to make sure what time until what time we have. Yes, I think we have 4 minutes.
4 minutes?
Yes, so last question. So, last question too. Okay. あと残り4分ぐらいという感じになってまいりましたので、いい感じで終わらせるように、したいと思います。Yes. 次の質問はですね、その真下にある質問なんですけども、CSP みたいにこのバイオレーションのレポートを送ることができますかっていう質問に対して答えていきたいと思います。
Okay. So how do you make it so it does report only like CSP? Currently, I believe Chrome has, Mariko might be able to confirm this, I don't know, has implemented a header called feature policy report only. Do you know? Okay, maybe. So I think there is currently a header that just feels like it's been thrown in kind of just because someone came up with this question and they needed an answer quickly is my feeling. It's called feature policy reports only, and it's just a separate header. This feels to me like a very, very bad hack, and hopefully there'll be a better solution. But at the moment, there isn't a way to put the proper feature policy header in report only mode.
Yes, I don't like that about in CSP as well. 答えちゃいましたけど、ですね、質問にあったところで言うと CSP みたいにレポートオンリーモードをするとどうすればいいんですかっていう話なんですが、CSP、まだ実装がされてるかどうかわからないんですが、Chrome でややありげな香りなんですが、誰も確認が取れないということで、フューチャーポリシーオンリーレポートみたいなヘッダーがをつけていただければレポートだけしてくれるというような感じになってます。CSP と同じですかね。で、アンドリュー曰く、CSP もそうなんですけど、ややハッキーな方法、普通にですね、ヘッダーの中で、レポートオンリーっていうアトリビューションを入れれば、レポートオンリーにしてくれりゃいいのになぜかヘッダーの属性ごとというか、名前ごと変えるっていう、素敵な状態なのはなぜなんでしょうねっていう話をしてました。Can you make it a little bit bigger? Oh, yeah. これですね、フューチャーポリシーリポートオンリーっていう、こう、長い感じの。これをすると、シンク XHR 何に引っかかると、レポートオンリーっていう赤いかな、オレンジかな、に出ますと。コンソールの中に出ますね。はい。最後。One more? Okay. Which situations best case apply this policy? I feel.
Oh, crikey, okay. Can I?
I think you have enough time to answer. We have a lot of questions.
Can I just do some quick fire in English and see? What is unsized media? Who ask this one? Unsized media, you can look at featurepolicy.info for information about unsized media. How do you set feature policy to different websites? Use charlesproxy.com to edit other people's websites.
チャールズ使うとヘッダー書き換えたりできますので、チャールズ使って、あれでもできますかね、エクステンションでも。You can use the extension as well.
How do I do this in Internet Explorer? You don't. You just set a header, and if Internet Explorer supports it, then which it doesn't, and it won't, then it will do the thing.
はい、予想通りなんですけど、IE ではヘッダーは届きますけど、IE は何もしないので、IE では当然動かないですし、サポートもしないですし、IE はそういう感じですね。いつも通りです。
And also, we should say that the reason it won't is because Internet Explorer doesn't exist anymore as a production browser. Microsoft is moving to a browser called Edge, and in fact, I believe Edge is shortly going to adopt Chromium as a rendering engine, so it will get feature policy because it will get Chromium.
はい。マイクロソフト的にはですね、マイクロソフト的にはって言い方がナイスな感じがしますけど、IE11 なんていうものはプロダクションサーバーにはいないということになってますので、IE11 のサポートはないということになります。ただ今後皆さんもご存知の通り、エッジがクロニウムベースになっていくということで、僕の記憶だともはやデベロッパーのプレビューは出てるのかな、ますので、そっちは同じクロニウムベースなので、この、フィーチャーポリシーはサポートするという形になります。
Last one, layout animations. When to use layout animations? If your website has a lot of animated effects or is a single page application, it's a good idea to disallow layout animations. Because you should be really caring a lot about rendering performance. And layout animations is one of those things that can really slow down your rendering performance. So if you have that kind of app, something like an Uber or, think of thick applications. These are the kind of applications where you should be caring about layout animations.
はい。リアクトじゃねえや。SPA とかですね。そもそも質問を日本語にしてないよ。いつレイアウトアニメーションをこのポリシーを使うタイミングがあるのかって質問なんですけども、SPA をやるような時にですね、いわゆるアップっぽいやつをやる時にレイアウトをスラッシングするようなアニメーションはそもそもするべきではないということなので、やるべきではないことに対してそのポリシーをかけて、出さないようにすると。どちらかというとリントに近いのかなっていうのは僕のイメージになります。はい。若干アドリブかもしましたけど、そんな感じで今日は終わりですかね。